This series presents information based in part on theory and conjecture. The producer's purpose is to suggest some possible explanations, but not necessarily the only ones, to the mysteries we will examine.
They'd been reported at dusk or in the dead of night, in clearings amid still woods and fields in lonely farm country. Sometimes they come in silence, sometimes with quiet thunder. Often they leave marks in the earth, signals of their passing. They've been seen but fleetingly, and their extraordinary presence creates a frightening mystery. In fields from West Virginia through Wisconsin to Oregon are the beginnings of answers.
Hi, I'm Jeremy. I'm a dork living in Portland, Oregon, who spent too many years listening to podcasts and not doing anything creative. This is my attempt to rectify that, to create and contribute something where I talk to people about their cultural obsessions and try to give some recommendations of my own. Welcome to Giving the Mic to the Wrong Person.
You know, I just posted that I was podcasting about aliens right now on Twitter, and somebody was like, "Are you podcasting on something else? Should I follow something else?" And I'm like, "Yes,
no,
follow Giving the Mic. I've been on here since like a year, and it's been really great for me to realize that I'm fucking dumb as shit and that I have a lot to learn about podcasting. Because when you do it yourself, you know, it's like,
yeah."
I'm sure you've been through that learning curve.
Yeah. For years and years, you know, it was like I was sitting in my room talking to myself into a microphone because it was just me.
Yeah.
I would interview people, but, you know, I had to do the introductions. And especially the first year, it was just – I felt very much like I did when I was 12 talking into a tape recorder pretending to be on the radio.
Yep.
Yeah, it was that experience. And recently I was on Michael Brooks' show, and Michael
nice.
Brooks is
I love his stuff. He's great.
Yeah, and it's like he's like I had him on my show, and then I was on his show, and he's like sitting in a studio somewhere, and I'm sitting with my USB microphone in my office next to my laundry. It's a weird kind of experience, you know. It's like, okay, but and I mentioned this to a guy who writes about the media and technology. David Auerbach, and he was like, yeah, what that means is not that podcasting and amateur podcasting is on the way up. It means that the mainstream is on the way down. So, you know, everything's crashing. I don't know if he's right, though.
Well, I think, like, podcasting is sort of like having a garage band in this day and age, but it's also one that you have to do with love, and you have to do with a little bit of, I guess, more understanding of the medium as a whole. I wasn't big on radio. I mean, the equivalent of me recording on a tape recorder at that time was probably like one of those things that they gave you, like the things that kids got after they watched Home Alone, and they were like, oh, I can get that recorder and
like Handycam 2000 or whatever that thing was called.
Yeah, and like I slow my voice down and play it back again. But yeah,
the Talk Boy.
The Talk Boy.
Yep.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So yeah, I'm definitely I'm not, like, credentialed at all, and I don't have any experience with it, but I think and you have an interesting thing to incorporate other people into, because I think a lot of podcasting is about guesting and having people that know something about something talk about something, as I continue to talk about stuff I don't know. Yeah, that's my favorite part about it.
Yeah, I like podcasting. I do think it's a leveler, and I think that the other great thing about podcasting is as you do it for longer, you develop. I mean, that's all. Just you develop, and it becomes it brings you lots of opportunities you wouldn't have if you didn't do it. So
exactly.
Yeah. No, it's like a really performative art. You keep doing it. The more stage time you have, the better you get at it. And speaking of getting at it, it's for like I wrote down like a handful of topics on my little notepad here. There was one topic because I think Jacob did want to get into the Posadists and the connection between communism and UFOs.
I'm a Posadist now.
Are you?
I don't know. Am I? Let's find out.
Okay.
We at some point he also wanted to get into like the government relationship between both UFO studies and also the cover-up, which means that we should get into at some point we should mention Project Blue Book, and even, dare I say, the episode of Quantum Leap that name checks it by.
Look, I don't want you sticking any of your pop culture garbage into this discussion.
Wait, we're not going to talk about the X-Files?
No.
We're not going to talk about X-Files at all?
We can talk about how that
helps
to promote the research
with
that went
this
into
argument
this.
about whether or not to stick pop culture garbage into the UFO experience. Okay.
I was gonna say,
sorry.
Well, that's the weird thing is like, yeah, the UFOs, what if they have never not been like a pop culture artifact?
Absolutely. I just did a podcast on War of the Worlds, and I'm sorry, but saucers and people from other planets have always been part of our culture and reflected it and influenced it even.
But I'm with Jacob here. I think we should start by talking about the phenomenon as if it is real.
Which it is.
I think it's
real.
really a good thought experiment to ask yourself the question, what if all of this isn't malarkey?
Which it's not.
Right. I mean, I'm on the fence, right? I mean, I'm certainly willing to entertain the notion that it's not, but I have not ever been convinced that it isn't. I mean, when I'm not on drugs, I've never been convinced that it isn't. So, but I think it's worthwhile just as a thought experiment to consider what it would mean if it was true.
Right. I think it's almost at some point it's kind of like it's like two separate topics that have kind of been merged into one, which is seeing weird shit in the sky, and the second one, kind of the explanation of that is, theorizing or hypothesizing what that weird shit actually was, and coming to like a certain set of answers that were very different from when civilizations past saw weird shit in the sky. Mm-hmm. And the other, so we got government relationship with UFO research and whatnot. Also, we can probably mention President Carter. That's about
right.
And so I got like 4 things that I have written out, and judging from how our conversations usually go, that's enough that is enough of a seed stock to begin with.
Can I just say one thing? It's like we can, like, to start out with, we can all agree that people today are seeing weird shit in the sky, that UFOs, as far as being unidentified flying objects, definitely exist, and
yes,
and that it's harder to surprise people about what's in the sky today than it would have been even 50 years ago, and certainly much more difficult than it would have been, say, before the invention of flight. That we are today, when we say that people are seeing weird shit in the sky, that is not just seeing something in the sky, but it's seeing something unusual. We can start
absolutely.
there. I just want to jump in and say that the preferred nomenclature these days is actually UAP, or unidentified aerial phenomena.
It's because it's not necessarily flying.
Well, I mean, I guess aerial would imply that, but it's not necessarily a ship. I mean, there's a lot of just sort of really weird stuff that is being observed in the sky, and
it makes sense. And also, I was reading the Wikipedia page today because I was trying to be cool. The first noted sightings were in 1897, and it was first started in Omaha, Nebraska, when somebody basically lit a balloon, like a basket, and put it up in a balloon. And then the next one was in Texas, where some kids basically put a lit thing on the leg of a turkey vulture, and they found out when the turkey vulture landed on the nearby school and burnt it down to the ground. And then there was other ones, but, 1897.
Successful mission.
Well, there's actually a lot of debate over the origins, because actually a lot of people have tied a lot of mythological stuff into that.
Absolutely.
There's some old
Egyptian.
Well, even the Bible has some
Ezekiel's
stories.
wheel.
Right, is
Wheel.
the classic example.
Wheel in the sky keeps on turning.
Yep.
Big wheel keep on.
That's my favorite part of it, to be honest with you. I think it's the most interesting, because I do believe that the phenomenon that people were seeing in the sky, and they were very deeply tied to that cosmology, which was really interesting, much more so than we are. We rarely look up, but when we see something, we are completely enraptured by it. I know I was. It was driving back from Vegas on the 60 and looking up, and there was over like Luke Air Force Base or like Barry Goldwater Reserve or whatever, and seeing my first like formation and flares, and I had an existential crisis. I literally sitting in the car, I'm like, open up the fucking sunroof. We have to look at this right now. It's so beautiful. They're there. And I actually believed for a second there. Like, I did. Like, I really wanted to.
Remind me at some point. I'm going to tell my dad's story. In fact, we might even call him in later on. Like, I'll call him and talk to him about his army story, and like cut that into the show at some point. Doug, is there anything? What did you particularly want to bring up? You mentioned some subjects before, and I'm just kind of curious if you had, because you had a couple things you wanted to mention, and if you had any thoughts about how you wanted to work.
I've been interested in UFOs. I've been interested in them for a long time. For a long time, I've decided that that the evidence for flying saucers or the extraterrestrial hypothesis is sketchy at best, and that there's so many false stories, or there's so many stories that turn out to be completely bogus, that to believe that we've been contacted by extraterrestrials is a leap of faith. It's not one that I'm willing to take at all. What I was in the past, when I was young and looking for something to believe in, but I don't now. But the other thing I guess I'll mention is I've written a book about UFOs called After the Saucers Landed, which we might talk about later if you guys want to. But I really want to hear what Jacob. I want to hear his spiel. I want to be preached to by a believer. I want to enter into this, conversation with my defenses down, and starting with the idea that, look, people have seen weird things in the sky. It's been in the news lately that the government is actually investigating, and we don't know what a lot of these things are. And I don't have all the evidence in front of me. I'd like to hear what Jacob has to say.
Well, I'm personally agnostic as far as ETH, or extraterrestrial hypothesis, but I don't necessarily buy a lot of the arguments that people make against it, one of which is it would be impractical for them to come all the way here, because even with our currently existing technology, the idea of sending, autonomous drones is, I think, entirely reasonable.
It is.
And, I mean, I wouldn't be surprised if we get to the point in the next, 20 years, everybody's talking about automated driving, but it would not be that difficult to set something up that would, for example, automate taking care of herds of animals. Mm-hmm. And, I mean, I would imagine that the conversations that those animals would have would not be entirely dissimilar to ours. I don't think that we're necessarily being farmed, but
no zoo hypothesis.
I don't subscribe to that, but I'm saying, for whatever reason, I could see that we are experiencing something entirely other that we don't understand.
Absolutely.
And that our glimpses of it just mean that we have no way of understanding it. I'm also not entirely convinced that the extraterrestrial hypothesis is the most efficacious, considering the fact that there's a lot of reports that indicate that there may be something actually extra-dimensional.
Yes, I agree with this entirely.
Yeah, so that also gets around ETH fairly conveniently. And if you want to talk about government reports, there's a guy named Nick Redfern, who I'm a big fan of, who wrote a book I'm trying to remember the name of. But basically it describes a actual government project that dug into these experiences and came to the conclusion that not only was the phenomena real, that abductions were real, but that also it was quasi-demonic in nature.
Oh, I like this.
Wow, yeah. That's vaguely medieval. Speaking of vaguely medieval, hello, ladies and gentlemen. You are listening to Giving the Mic to the Wrong Person. I am your host, Jeremy. We join our conversation in media oversaturation, res. I have three guests joining me tonight, all return visitors to our scenic sunny basement studios. I will now we'll now go around the horn and have everyone introduce themselves. Starting remotely. Remote guest, could you please announce yourself for the viewing audience?
Okay, so my name is Douglas Lain. I'm the publisher of Zero Books and not the host of this podcast, but also a novelist. I've written books such as After the Saucers Landed and coming soon, Bash Revolution. Mm-hmm. And I'm glad to join in a conversation that's not about left politics, but about what we see in the skies.
Well,
don't see.
Don't get too ahead of yourself there, I think.
Okay, all right. We'll get to left politics.
Yeah.
And the voice you just heard was...
Jacob Spooky Mercy. The book I was thinking of is Final Events and the Secret Government Group on Demonic UFOs and the Afterlife, written by Nick Redfern. I have a copy, so if you want to borrow it, just hit me up.
I may hit you up. I'm Nat. I am a frequent guest on this podcast and the most useless person here. Just kidding.
Not at all.
I'm the host. How useful do you think I am?
Mulder, it's me. Yeah. I host Meta Machina, which is another podcast that nobody knows about. Wait, no, yours is much more known than mine. I cut that part. Damn it! Why do I even speak? Okay, all right. And I only
no self editing allowed.
Yeah, my only knowledge of UFOs comes from being traumatized as a young child by my mother, who loved both. She really loved D.B. Sweeney and wanted me to watch Fire in the Sky at 5 years old, and that was a traumatized experience. And ever since I've been obsessed.
Oh wow.
I think the X-Files would be a much better show if, half the cases that they worked just turned out to be mundane. Mm-hmm. So Scully was actually right half the time.
Yeah.
That always drove me nuts. It should have been they should have added a lot more Scooby-Doo into that, old school Scooby-Doo.
Absolutely.
They're it's just this asshole. Okay, never mind.
Get right up on your mic.
No.
It's like Law and Order SVU. There's a natural answer to it.
All right. Yeah, but every episode of that show is Mulder. There's a perfectly reasonable explanation for how a giant lizard man managed to crawl out of that bathroom.
And then there isn't.
And there's 50 witnesses. She's never able to prove that there wasn't, so.
That's true.
Really
but we were talking about the different hypotheses, the different theories that might explain the blinking lights that some people see in the skies. And you had mentioned that you thought the extra-dimensional hypothesis might be stronger than the extraterrestrial one. And I just want to say, I think that just adds another complication to the problem. The first thing that we have to establish is that there aren't terrestrial explanations for what's being seen in the sky.
Yeah.
Wouldn't you say?
Yeah, I think it's complicated because it's very difficult to break one piece of this apart and examine it in isolation. You have the lights in the sky, and that's one thing, but you also have, and I say this as somebody who attends MUFON meetings, a lot of people who I find really credible who have had some really unusual experiences. And I'm not just talking about people who have strange dreams. I'm talking about people who are awake, who report abduction phenomena. Mm-hmm. So that's a whole other element. And it's often, you see a lot of really weird recurring patterns, and you would expect this, where you see UFOs and then reports of abduction start kicking in.
Okay, but when it comes to the abduction experience, mm-hmm. my position on it is you just have to throw everything we thought we knew about that completely away. That the researchers involved in abduction experiences so thoroughly poisoned the well.
Are you talking about how in the 90s there was that whole
I'm talking about up
hypnosis?
Until maybe 5 to maybe more 7 years ago.
Uh-huh.
I mean, I interviewed Bud Hopkins, who was a major abduction researcher, and I interviewed him towards the end of his life. He had just put out his autobiography, and he was at the time embroiled in scandal. One of his partners, I forget the guy's name, was being not quite sued, but I mean, looking back on it from.
Are you talking about David M. Jacobs?
Yes.
Yeah, well, so he was actually investigated by Harvard, but Harvard actually ultimately never found against him in any way. They said that he was entirely...
Yeah, but it doesn't matter whether or not he... From where I'm sitting, it doesn't matter whether or not he could be found guilty of, I don't know, some sort of...
influence?
Harassment, or David Jack... What is this guy's name again?
David M. Jacobs.
David M. Jacobs. He was a partner of Bud Hopkins, an abduction researcher, and he developed a relationship with an abductee or an experiencer, and over long distance, they would write to each other. They would talk on the phone. Mm-hmm. I think there were a few instances where he put her under hypnosis over the phone.
Oh dear.
That can be questionable.
To bring forward memories. She thought that she had been mistreated. There was no finding that she had been mistreated against her will or that he had intentionally done anything to her exactly. But his methodology and mindset was certainly discredited by the whole affair.
So
he believed things at times, like, for instance, when people would use instant messenger to talk to him and claim to be aliens while they were talking to him over instant messenger, he would apparently completely believe that he was talking to aliens.
Wow, this is like coast to coast.
Jacobs has reappeared regularly and actually appeared on Art Bell's later show. I think it was Dark Matter.
Yeah, all of them made the rounds on those kinds of programs. But anyway, I myself talked to Bud Hopkins. I thought he was a very interesting guy, a kind person, a talented, creative person, but he was an artist.
Yeah.
And his methodology was the methodology of a creative artist and not someone who was investigating the truth. He brought these abduction experiences together to create a story and a vision in the same way that he would bring together ideas and material to make a sculpture or a painting. And I just don't believe that the abductee researchers have any credibility at all.
Yeah,
so, when you're talking about anecdotal experiencers, stories that you hear while you're at the MUFON meeting, well, I'm sorry, I don't really buy any of it until there's some sort of systematic investigation of that kind of experience, because you're talking about a situation where people are invited to tell stories about their experience and gain social prestige for what they've experienced. I'm not saying they're lying. I'm just saying that is a climate where truth can easily be lost.
Real quick, can you let's back up just a second. Can you explain to the viewing audience who Bud Hopkins was? Yeah,
Bud Hopkins was an abstract expressionist painter, first and foremost.
When from about what era?
Well, he started painting in the 50s, and he would hang around with people he knew Jackson Pollock, and he hung around with some of the other pretty well-known Mark Rothko, abstract expressionists, and he was young for that crowd. He was a newcomer when they were well established. But he was an abstract expressionist in the 50s and 60s and into the 70s. He made a small career for himself. He has pieces in major museums like the Metropolitan in New York. He was an artist, not a major artist, but a fine artist with a reputation. And he also, sometime in the 70s, I believe, started to be interested in the UFO phenomenon.
We have done our audience survey here, and I was actually quite amazed because most of the people here do not deny, say that there might be or they don't know. And this is Mr. Bud Hopkins, who has been researching the subject for quite some time. This is his second book. It's called Intruders, The Incredible Visitations at Copley Woods. His first book was called Missing Time, and you're working on a third book. When Mr. Hopkins is not working on books, he's actually an artist, and quite a well-known artist, because he has works in the Guggenheim Museum, and one must be of a certain high-level strata to end up in the Guggenheim. So how does one go from doing wooden sculptures in the Guggenheim to writing books about UFOs and visitations and aliens?
Well, Deanie, actually, I began and still am essentially an artist, and I had no interest in the UFO subject at all. And I had a daytime sighting of a UFO 25 years ago over Cape Cod that lasted about 3 minutes, along with two other people, and that
What
gets
did you see?
attention.
What did you see?
We saw a small circular grayish disc which hovered and flew very quickly away from us. We saw it from a distance from the side. We more or less saw underneath it that it was completely circular, no details. We tried to explain it every way we could, and then finally, as I was slowing down and we were looking at it, it suddenly shot across the road behind us very fast, and we jumped out.
And wrote articles about it for like the Village Voice and other publications, and eventually started writing books about it and bringing people into his house to be hypnotized and to tell their stories of abduction.
All right, for most of us who think about UFOs and aliens, that we have a concept in our mind that people have either seen what you have seen or they have been taken on a spaceship and they've had an encounter.
Right.
But what happens in your first book, Missing Time, and the people you are about to meet is quite a different experience, and it is something that you discovered through a tremendous amount of research and interviews, in which hypnosis was used.
In many cases, hypnosis is used.
And he created an archive of data, and tried to figure out what was going on, and developed a story about aliens coming to Earth, abducting people, mating people, creating hybrids between aliens and humans.
It sounds like he was trying to create a mythology.
The term is hybrids.
Hybrids?
Okay.
Hybrids.
Oh, God. What a yeah, the horrible puns, ladies and gentlemen. That's
an amazing story, though.
I think that's more of a David M. Jacobs thing than a Bud Hopkins thing, though. Just to be clear.
Okay.
You don't think? No, Bud Hopkins totally believed that there were extraterrestrials, like aliens, on the Earth, walking amongst us, and that there was a project of selective breeding to create a new species.
I was just referring to the hybrids terminology, which I think is unique to Jacobs. But.
Yeah.
And vaguely references a certain Misfits album.
Okay, a number of questions popped to mind. For example, if you were staring at a hybrid, would you know it?
No, you would not know it. And if you knew it, that person wouldn't be there.
Well, then that would suggest a more subtle merging of the species, if you want to put it that way, because they certainly look more human than they do anything else, right?
I call them hybrids. They are bred to look human, and not just human, but average human that will not stand out, that blends in, period. If they're too tall, not a chance of coming down here. If they got too big a nose, not going to happen. If their eyes are too big, nope. They have to look absolutely average.
Normal.
Now, here's the thing. All gray aliens and all hybrids and all hybrids and all other beings on board the object have one interesting trait. They can control people's minds neurologically and make them do or think or see anything that they want them to do or see or think or see. And we can't do that to them. That is an astoundingly huge difference.
It is.
It's a difference between species. It makes us a second-class species and them a first-class species. It's not like they're just kissing cousins who live off and somewhere else and they're coming to visit us and all the rest of that stuff. That's not what this is about. You got to remember, this is a global phenomenon. This goes around the world.
Okay.
Okay, where were you? How do we bring about?
So I guess I'm pushing this sort of skeptic view, but I feel like if we're going to start talking about abductees and those kinds of experiencers or that kind of story, we have to be really clear that most all of the so-called data that's involved in that is completely corrupted. We can't really take any of it seriously.
Well, I am a chronic sleep paralysis sufferer, and
right, there you go.
I've been through experiences that felt real to me. I felt like I was awake. I felt like I was alive and well and lying in my bed paralyzed and lights coming in through my window and people breaking in through my doors and hearing sounds. And I actually had, I've had visual and auditory hallucinations to the point where I thought when I woke up, I just couldn't distinguish reality from irreality. So I think that there's that whole point of it, and hypnosis was such a weird botched science throughout the 80s and 90s especially, where you have all this like satanic panic bullshit about, oh yeah, we experienced all of this and we've regressed it and it's not real, obviously. And like there is a lot of definite bunk science and there's no way of disproving it because, again, it is subjective experience, but the fact that it exists in people's minds as a mental construction does not discount its reality for the people that are experiencing it, in my mind. Like, I am...
Well, I mean, it discounts its reality in terms of something that we might refer to as objective truth, but it doesn't discount its cultural significance or its psychological impact or, or what it tells us about the human imagination or any of that, but none of that is central to the main question of, like, what is in the skies is being reported that it's actually being investigated right now by the U.S. government. Mm-hmm. I really think you have to separate out some of the lore and some of the reports and say, look, some of this information, I'm not saying none of it's true. I'm not saying no one has ever abducted. I don't know. I just know that we don't have a good methodology for investigating that question. We've done what's been done by ufologists in that terrain has been abysmal. It's been a creative project and not an investigation at all. Well, so that's my opinion anyway. So, but I don't know everything. I know Bud Hopkins. I know about David Jacobs. I don't even know his name, but I know Bud Hopkins. I talked to him, and I know a little bit about the scandal. But is there someone more credible than those guys on that topic?
I think it depends on the issue. But as far as the abductees, I would say I think you need to make a distinction between these experiencers, because in some cases they aren't coming forward, they aren't talking about it, they have to be coaxed into it, and some of these people are highly reluctant, and some of these people, I know of at least one case where this person is not willing to come forward, is not willing to discuss it with the larger community, and is really disturbed.
Yeah, that doesn't. In no way does that make that story more credible.
Right, but my point is, that I think we're throwing out the baby with the bathwater here.
And this is important not just in UFOs. It's important in general. If someone won't report the story, won't bring forward the facts, but tells you in private, then that story is less credible than it would be if they would report the story and will bring forward the facts. And I'd say this, like, I have a friend who reports to me all the time about kind of strange mystical experiences that he's had, but he never follows it up, never tries to track down what actually happened, because it's part of his own personal mythology. And I love the guy. He's a good friend, close friend of mine, but I don't think any of it is true in the sense of, like, objectively true. I know I'm being a bully at this point, so I'll shut up for a while.
Okay, but here's the thing. I mean, you can be a bully all you want, but you're doing something worse here, which is trying to have it both ways, because your initial argument was that these people aren't plausible because they're coming forward. Now you're making the claim that they're not plausible because they're not coming forward.
Yeah, but I wasn't saying that at all. I didn't say they were plausible because they came forward. I'm saying that the set of data that we had from people who had experienced it and reported on it was all corrupted because of the research methods used by ufologists. That the data we have is corrupted. I didn't say that it was corrupted because they came forward. I said it was corrupted because of the lack of any kind of sincere methodology in those researchers. That's what I said.
Yeah,
I didn't say it was corrupt because they came forward. I didn't say they were seeking fame, or I didn't try to explain their psychological motivations at all. I said, look, the research that we have on this subject is no good. And anything that you tell me is anecdotal on that kind of fantastical story, I have to just sort of pocket. I can't do anything with that as far as I'm concerned. But when it comes to, like, real research that's being done, even by amateurs, if they have some standards, that I'll be interested in.
Yeah, that makes me think that, like, the new science that you could get out of it just from neural scanning and from MRIs. Yeah, and also from doing it in a method. I mean, obviously, like, you're not going to get the research funding and the grants to actually do this work, but I think it would actually be pretty useful for me in a sense, because I honestly think that there are some ties between the psychological experiences that we have and also the zeitgeist of the world around us, whether or not it's true in terms of what we're experiencing. And I'm like literally part of that kind of group that wants to believe that there's something bigger and better out there or more interesting. I would like to see real hard science like actually go after this.
On that note, let us. Trying to think of God. See, this is why I wanted. I prefer everybody to be here in real time because it makes these things a lot easier. But it's like we get two different ways to split. One is out. One is to either we go to the talking about when like certain American governmental functions have researched these things with actual scientists or people who they claim was. Actually, yeah, it's. Or the other thing was I wanted to get on tape just talking about offering up a bit more like back history for folks about if someone could summarize the initial like abductee story, which I think is like a mid '60s thing, wasn't it?
You mean Betty and Barney Hill?
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Doug, what are you feeling? Which way are you leaning to go towards? Should we go towards recounting the initial abductee story, or should we segue more into talking about, say, the kind of pre-war, post-war? Yeah, let's say post-war American government efforts to study these things.
Well, unless there's an abductee story that I'm not aware of, or an abductee researcher who any one of you guys think is reputable, I think we should go towards the post-war, research that was done by the government and the kinds of things that came out, in documents like Project Blue Book and those kinds of ufologists and the kinds of research that had a little bit more credibility.
Yeah, and let's be distinct here. It wasn't like the government projects where they were sending weather balloons up with microphones to, spy on the Soviets and their nuclear tests. It's more like the actual tests that they were doing to study actual UFOs.
Well, I think that's the fun thing, is they were both concurrent.
Mm-hmm.
And they might actually, some of the UFO research cases might have actually covered some of those weather balloons. So it gets really complicated.
Well, to say, yeah, I mean, we didn't have working man-made satellites for a decade after
Sputnik.
We get, like you said, weather balloons were a hell of a lot more achievable, low tech, and you put a couple like cameras and some radio shit on a balloon, you can do a lot more than.
But they were really complicated balloons, from what I saw. Like they were extremely complicated. Like they actually designed new things to make those, and I find that fascinating that the space race legitimately created this whole genesis of this weird shit that people didn't understand because the science was too fast for human comprehension in terms of our society and population. We just did not know what was happening, so we had to create this mythology around it, which I find really great. It's influenced pop culture, but it's also influenced culture in general. It has always been there. I mean, War of the Worlds was written because the Belgians discovered artillery, and the idea that you could wipe out mass populations was not something that they had thought of before. Just saying.
Yeah.
Which gives, I would say, a potential branch for future episode about how military movements kind of fed into very budding genre fiction. Well, let's see. I think Jacob, do you want to go with, speak on any of the I don't know, I guess opine about any of the more governmental aspects of it?
The government aspect is something that I find the most interesting because I think it's actually the easiest thing to prove. I've actually filed some FOIA requests myself with regards to some information and not had the best results, but that's part of the game. There's a guy named, I think, John Greenwald, who has a really good website where he gets into this stuff a lot, and he has a lot of documentation. But the thing I find most disturbing is the intersection between the government and UFOs insofar as their manipulation and, I think, demonstrable cover-up of a lot of this. A lot of people don't know this, but Project Blue Book was actually the third government research project into the UFO phenomena. It was preceded by Sign and Grudge, the first of which actually came to the result that this was the result of unexplained phenomena that was extraterrestrial. I don't think they use the term extraterrestrial, but they basically say, we don't think humans are responsible for this. And it was that report was actually destroyed, and they denied destroying it for years and years.
Wow.
But I think probably the most well-known case of them basically sticking their oar into things is the example of Richard Doty, who was a Air Force. I'm trying to remember the exact term.
Investigator or officer?
Oh, he was a member of the AFOSI, and he basically there was a researcher who there was a really good documentary about this fairly recently, actually, called Mirageman, that got into some of this material.
Mirageman?
Mm-hmm.
Nice.
Who put it out?
I'm looking it up right now. It was released in 2014. Director Roland Denning. Former government agents discussed their involvement in shaping UFO mythology during the Cold War.
I'm going to go grab a book off my shelf to hopefully contribute to this conversation.
Yeah.
Go for it.
So I'll be right back. I went to my UFO bookshelf, which I found to be surprisingly bare. I suppose over the years I have just lost interest, and I don't know where those books even ended up. But
Powell's.
Oh, yeah, probably. But I have one on that's written by a New Ager called "Waiting for the Martian Express" by Richard Grossinger, which I thought was an interesting book in 1991.
It's kind of
Then there's Robert K.G. Temple, The Serious Mystery, which is another one of those. It's like just this side of what's that guy's that thought that the ancient astronaut hypothesis.
The Chariots of the God.
Chariots of Gods. Yeah.
German name. What the hell's that guy's name?
In 1968, just 1 year before Neil Armstrong's epic spaceflight, a book was published that forever changed the way many in the scientific, religious, and creative communities would view their home planet. Written by Swiss author Erich von Däniken, Chariots of the Gods attempted to prove that alien explorers had visited the Earth thousands of years ago.
This is slightly more serious, but it's about a Dogon tribe that seemed to have had a religion around the Sirius star system that seemed to have enough astronomical data in it that it made their mythology seem likely to connect to UFO contact. But really, if you dig deeper, it's somewhat specious. And then I had a book called Report on Communion, The Facts Behind the Most Controversial True Story of Our Time by Ed Conroy, which is all like following up after Whitley Strieber's Communion. And so those are the books I have, and all of it is garbage. I mean, none of it, it's garbage in terms of getting at truth. It's not garbage in terms of like if you're a science fiction writer and you want to play around with ideas. Right?
Is it just methodologically like just terrible, or like they don't? It's like they kind of like, is it the thing that like Art Bell would do, which is kind of, or I guess George Norrie does this too, is just kind of like, just total credulousness to encourage a better story, or just more contribution from whoever they were talking to.
Yeah, exactly. Well, okay, so Report on Communion. So I haven't read this book in over 20 years, right? I mean, I read this book in probably 91, 92, and at the time I had just read Whitley Strieber's Communion, and I picked this book up as well. This is when I was really interested in the subject. And so I don't remember all the flaws in it, right? So I couldn't tell you exactly what's in this book. It's been so long. But I can tell you that Whitley Strieber himself, over the years, has acted in ways that discredit his original story, and that it seems likely that he is what he appears to be, a science fiction writer writing a science fiction novel as nonfiction.
Welcome to Larry King Live. Tonight, Close Encounters of the Third Kind. Whitley Strieber says they're really out there, and they could be coming to get you. And life is but a dream. Dream reader Cook Giovanetti opens the hidden door to your soul. Now, here's Larry King.
Good evening on this Monday night, a beautiful night in Washington, D.C. We hope it's nice wherever you are. Welcome to another night, another week of Larry King Live. Later we'll meet Cook Giovannetti and we'll get into the subject of dream interpretation. Our first guest tonight is author of the runaway bestseller, Transformation, The Breakthrough. He is Whitley Strieber. There is the book. It is published by Beech Tree Books, a division of William Morrow, and it is a continuation of his enormous bestseller, Communion. A continuation how, Whitley?
Well, it's not really a continuation. What happened to me was, after I finally realized that this probably was real,
I found
in the sense that they were
another planet.
People, something that was non-human, that was intelligent, and that seemed to be, I don't know, from another planet. I would guess so. Where else? I mean, but I turned toward it, and I started trying to challenge it, to get through my fear. And over a period of months, I formed a relationship with them that I believe could be a template almost for, almost as if they have one end of a phone and we've had two wires. Now, if we start trying to have this relationship, we'll have a phone too. Maybe.
So transformation is the story of contact.
It's the story of an attempt at a relationship with them. If they turn out to be real, as I think they are, then yeah, it is a story of contact.
When did his book originally publish?
1989, I believe.
Okay, because that came out in 89, and then the film was like 91? 91, because
91.
Fire in the Sky was 92, 93.
Right. I saw, and like Fire in the Sky, and like, I was 20 in 91, so I was living on my own. I dropped out of college. I was working for Osberg, and I was, smoking pot and reading about UFOs and talking to people, and kind of was a fruitcake, not, So yeah, I was all into this stuff, and it was a big idea, I think, that was floating around, like the different subcultures. The UFO phenomena was, in certain subcultures taken seriously, So yeah, I picked up a report on Communion, but then since then, over those, what has it been, 26 years since then? Yep. 27 years? Whitley Strieber has gone through several iterations, and he's gone deeper and deeper off the deep end, and it's clear that what he was aiming at was a career and not at, he kind of developed a little cult around himself. He ran a podcast for a while. He said wild things, and he's clearly part of an industry of mysticism and conspiracy. He's part of that industry. He's not. Right. He's not a serious person.
Right. On the commodification train.
Yeah, it's you never want to just dismiss someone because of who they are, like some ad hominem, but none of the stories have ever been researched in any kind of serious way or methodologically sound way. And given what he does in public and how inaccessible any kind of real information is about his stories, you just have to dismiss it. The Serious Mystery book is one that has a facade of being very scholarly, but as the years go by, I've touched a little bit more on understanding what real anthropological research might be like. I mean, not that I do it, but I've had enough people tell me that this isn't actual anthropology. And then The Martian Express is just clearly a New Age book. It's a New Age religious book and not a book about actual, experiences. So I just think that the UFO phenomena is riddled with all sorts of mysticisms and impenetrable religious ideology, and that it is basically a version of a secular religion. It's not.
Well, hold on. Are you attacking religion now? Are you saying that Christ didn't die for our sins?
Can I talk about how there's almost a blue collar
I don't want to. I'm not. Look, I think there's a great deal to learn from religion in terms of psychologically and socially in terms of the human imagination.
Hey, I went
philosophically,
yeah.
But
I went through catechism
I don't think
class.
that literally it's true that there was that he was resurrected and that there's a God up in heaven. I'll remain agnostic on the question of God, and I think you just have to remain agnostic about the question of UFO contact until there's good information.
Natasha, what were you going to say?
Oh, I was just going to say that I think you have a perfect point there in terms of it being religious in basis. Like, there is an idea that has been bridged by the fact that, like, if you look at stuff like the Phoenix Lights or any other phenomena that happened, local news coverage treated it as an unknown and an unidentified thing, and as almost like a mysticism.
The latest chapter into a strange valley encounter. 3 months ago tonight, something strange happened in the skies over Arizona that still hasn't been fully explained. And in reality, we may never know exactly what happened that night. Tonight, first on Fox, we hear from a Phoenix family who may have been closer to whatever it was in the sky, closer than anyone else.
It's getting closer and closer, and we're saying, that thing's coming right at us.
Tim Lee and his family are among the hundreds of witnesses who've come forward to talk about the night of March 13th, an event now known as the Phoenix Lights. The Lees first saw the lights while looking north from their home in the Sunny Slope Mountains.
When it finally got here and we realized this thing was coming right over us, we really started getting antsy. And then when it went directly overhead without a sound, it was like that. It was so big.
You couldn't even hear the wind. It was so quiet. It was just... It just didn't even do anything. It just came through.
These images of what they saw are made on a computer. They're a combination of digital photos of the landscape taken by Lee and computer drawings of the objects his family saw in the sky.
It was a giant V, all right? And the right side of the V went over us. The left side was like a couple blocks over it.
We just didn't know what to do. It was just like, my God, how big is this thing? It didn't seem threatening because when it was right overhead and we couldn't hear a sound, it was like you're just awestruck.
Jim Delatoso has been researching UFOs for 20 years. Right now, he's in the middle of putting together a virtual reality model of what happened that night. He's talked to hundreds of witnesses about the night of March 13th, including the Lees.
He thinks that he said if he had a tennis ball, he could have hit it.
And if you go back to, talk shows from the early 90s, they treated it as real. And so you have a large population of people that maybe don't have any religious basis, or they do, and they have this idea of things coming out of the sky, and they believed in it for a long time and appreciated it. And then you have the X-Files. Of course, I'm sorry to mention it, but it was formative for me, but it was also some of those things where I was like, oh, this is real. Like, I never questioned it growing up. As a child, I thought that was just the reality that we lived in. The government has been covering up UFOs since Roswell. And when you have that, you have a group of people that absolutely believe in it and have a spiritual connection to it in a way. Like, it gives them meaning and purpose. And I really don't think that that's a bad thing. Honestly, I know that it doesn't mean anything to us to say, I'm absolutely an agnostic and skeptic in many ways, but I'm also one of those people that's like, if you tell me your story and you had an experience and it was beautiful to you, that's all that really matters. My dad told me of seeing a UFO. He probably was high on drugs and
right.
Just pulled over on the road, and he's like, I saw the lights above me and they called to me, and I'm like, as a 7-year-old child, I was like, this is the coolest thing I've ever heard of. This means something. Like, there's a world outside of my own mundane, banal shit that I can actually appreciate. And yeah, I absolutely think that, the zeitgeist movement of UFOs, as they've kind of come out of all of the history that we've experienced, I hope it continues, actually. I really hope that people start to get more into it, because imagining a world and aliens outside of yourself is really fucking cool, and it's fascinating, and it makes you feel small in a good way. It makes you understand that, the universe is bigger than you, and maybe the planet you're on is dying, and you've corrupted it and destroyed it, and that maybe we should stop fucking killing each other, and,
yeah.
Space communism.
Okay, I have two, I want to say two opposing things to that. On the one hand, I definitely think that the power of the human imagination and the kind of beauty of what I'll just go ahead and call religious experience shouldn't just be dismissed. I'm not some sort of Sam Harris type new atheist.
Thank Christ.
Right. So
Jordan Peterson.
I am. I'm actually going to go a step further than anybody else. I'm going to say I don't think Christ existed. I'm a Christ mythicist. Come at me, bro.
All right. But let me get to the second prong of this. On the other hand, I do think that we should question our dreams. I'm a Zizekian here. It's like when you think you've escaped ideology, that's when you're right in the thick of it. And when you're having this beautiful, mystical, dreamlike experience, that's when you really need to pay attention and bring it back and think about it and critically, because often enough the things that we dream about, the ways that we envision escaping our society are just rife with all sorts of presuppositions and ideological constructs, and that the very way that we dream about escaping just replicates all the ideologies that block us from thinking clearly about how to change our political situation.
Oh, I agree completely. I think that there's this whole idea that we're either being attacked or that we are creating a better world for ourselves. And it's not always so clear where those lines lie.
Yeah, my take was going to be cut to the end of Brazil.
One of my favorite movies of all time.
One aspect of the UFO phenomenon that we also have to consider in all this, though, particularly with the abductee reports, is that the way that they're reported does not necessarily give you a tremendous sense of optimism and hope in things. I mean, I guess one of the classic examples of that would be what was described by Whitley Strieber, and that experience, by his initial accounts at least, seemed genuinely horrifying. I think listening to more recent discussions with him, he seems to have come to grips with it in some ways, but to a certain extent it seems like he's just sort of trying to psychologically justify what he went through. So,
are you bringing communion into this?
I am.
No, we were talking about communion before you guys came back.
Can I just talk about how my mom made me watch Communion when I was
the movie?
4?
God, yeah, the movie's fucking horror.
Oh, no. I watched the hot takes of it recently, the edits, and it's Christopher Walken, ladies and gentlemen.
I know.
Our audience might not know how wonderful this is.
I haven't seen it.
Keep going. I'm just
full on dead.
Going, amen.
Full on dead zone. Yeah, full on Christopher Walken in like dead zone.
The worst casting choice ever.
Oh really. Yeah, no, I mean all of his dialogue is delivered. Christopher Walken, aka SNL level Christopher Walken.
When the doctor hypnotized me, I was supposed to recall prowlers or something, but in fact, I recall something else. I sure do. What? Little blue fuckers about that big.
And
I saw.
But I had nightmares about a little gray looking around a corner at me for years, and I did not know where it came from. And as an adult, I finally watched the movie, and I was like, how was I scared of this as a child? Oh wait, this is just the first CGI that I've ever seen, and it's just it's just the dumbest shit ever. But when you're a little kid, it's a formative experience, and so yes, do not watch that movie as a child, but as an adult, watch it and make fun of it because it's fucking hilarious.
Years earlier, I'll say, several years earlier, when the expanded version of of Close Encounters was broadcast, that actually had like the extra bits that had the little like where they dressed up the kids as the Greys running around, and I saw that when I was 6 or 7 because my father, who himself had witnessed something in the sky he could not explain, which a story that we'll get to at some point in this episode. Loved the film. I mean, it's Spielberg at the top of his powers, but I saw it a bit too young. That's how it goes. And it's freaked me the hell out.
Fire in the sky, and
So Jacob, why do you take Whitley Strieber seriously?
I don't. I just mentioned him as an example of an abductee who had a profoundly negative experience, and I was contrasting that with Natasha's more
humanistic.
Yeah. But you don't think his story is true?
I don't have an opinion about his story. Although, I mean, actually, I'll go a step further and say, I was going to mention this earlier, I don't find I don't trust Bud Hopkins, and I think he may be a fraud.
Well, he's dead, and
that doesn't mean he's not a fraud.
No, he was a fraud. And my opinion of Bud Hopkins is this: he was not a charlatan. If you think that a charlatan is someone who intentionally concocts a lie for their own self-betterment. I
don't know. How familiar are you with the Linda Napolitano abduction case?
I'm familiar. And
Okay.
I read what his wife wrote, what Bud Hopkins' wife wrote. And what she described was what I would consider to be someone who was caught up in a religious reverie and who, because of that, tossed aside standards of evidence and on some level didn't believe his own story, on some level did. Like I think we should maybe move to Posadism here.
Mm-hmm.
I think that the Bud Hopkins approach to abductions and the way he treated the abductees when they would report stories to him is similar to the way people embrace politics that involve revolution today. But they think that they do. They're caught up in some sort of ideology. They don't. It's a self-confirming identity function or something. It doesn't actually, like, if you put them in a situation where they were actually faced with a choice about whether or not to do something that would bring the wrath of the government and maybe destabilize a city or a state, or do something that could overturn the system as it is, or at least cause a lot of chaos. 9 times out of 10, or even more often than that, these tanky revolutionaries wouldn't do a damn thing, right? They don't believe it at all, but they believe that they believe, and I think that's Bud Hopkins. Like, people would come to him and say, "Oh yeah, I was kidnapped, taken out of the city, beaten, told never to talk about this again. And I can tell you where I was when they abducted me. I can tell you," and this is like a Men in Black kind of story. And then I can tell you I can kind of tell you about where they took me. And Bud Hopkins would write it all down. But what wouldn't he do? He wouldn't call the police. He wouldn't report this as a crime. He wouldn't take it as seriously as something that happened in the real world.
He would never try to verify it.
He would never try to verify it. So, but that wasn't because he was fooling himself on some level, I think. Like an artist fools himself in order to create an imaginary world.
It's an aesthetic.
Yeah. It's like an aesthetic, imaginative, creative experience, dreamlike, imaginary, ideological even, but not real, and not something that people on some basic level take seriously.
Mm-hmm.
Like a Jodorowsky film.
Yeah.
Or how do you pronounce it? Jodorowsky? I can't remember.
I've heard it Jodorowsky, but I don't know for sure.
That does seem to be a manifestation of ideology that is pretty common. I mean, I remember how much Republicans love screaming about the deficit, and yet...
Where does it exist?
Now that we seem to be in a situation where the deficit looks like it's going to be going up, suddenly it's not that big a deal anymore.
No, as long as it supports our military budget.
Yeah.
No, the whole point of the deficit was you freak about you make the deficit an issue because
taxation is death.
Well, right. Well, you make the deficit issue, and so that a lot of very serious people like start freaking out about it too, because they're all, to borrow the phrase from Gore Vidal, they're all like courtiers at Versailles on the Potomac, start freaking out at this stuff, and then the whole point is to from like Reagan on is you jack up expenditures and then start cutting revenue, and then so like whoever comes in after you, usually the Democrats has to it's like you make them freak about it too. So they cut social services, but they will never cut the military expenditures.
The whole point is that you cannot ask people to give you money, but you can always ask them to here's more money in some sense and form, even if it's trickle down economics.
But on the other hand, you have more complicated things like, what was the name of the UFO cult? Where they
Heaven's Gate.
Yeah, where they actually
Heaven's
were
Gate.
willing to top themselves in order to.
Yeah.
I mean that. And you always have this
90s
uncertainty.
BBS.
You always have this uncertainty when you're talking to people about whether you're never really sure if they believe what they're saying, and I think that complicates matters a lot. And I think. I just finished listening to a podcast about Jonestown, and
Which one?
Last podcast on the left.
Yep.
And I was shocked that there were as many people who were as on board with some of that stuff that And
when you listen to the real audio recordings of that, it terrifies you on a fundamental level.
There was like a documentary based on like testimony from people who were there, who survived, and then also like recordings at Jonestown. It was amazing.
Hearing them argue against killing the children when they finally realized what was happening, that is the most soul-crushing thing I've ever heard in my entire life.
Weren't they watching Charlie and the Chocolate Factory while they waited to eat the Kool-Aid or drink the Kool-Aid? I'm sorry. Or eat the Jell-O.
It was actually Flavor Aid. I'm sorry, I have to correct you here. Kool-Aid did not have a part in that. It was all Flavor Aid.
Actually, I have to correct you on that. Both products were available, although it looks like Kool-Aid was not used for the cyanide.
Yeah.
Oh, okay.
All I remember is I come in this as an ex-college radio type. I just remember the Concrete Blonde song called Jonestown, where they start the song by sampling audio.
If by any chance you would make a mistake to try to come in and take any one of us, we will not let you. You will die. You will have to take anybody over all of our dead bodies. Love is the only weapon. Martin Luther King died with love. Kennedy died talking about something you couldn't even understand, some kind of generalized love, and he never even backed it up. He shut down. Bullshit. Love is the only weapon with which I got to fight. I got a hell of a lot of weapons to fight. I got my claws, I got cutlasses, I got guns, I got dynamite, I got a hell of a lot to fight. I'll fight, I'll fight, I will fight,
Picking up on a thing you mentioned, fuck it, let's get into
Posadist.
Yeah, let's get into Posadism.
Dolphin space communism.
Yeah.
Posadism is an ideology or movement born out of the Fourth International and headed by a certain J. Posadas, who, per Wikipedia, tried to create a synthesis of Trotskyism and ufology. Posadis's most prominent thesis from this perspective was flying saucers, the process of matter and energy. Posadist believes that extraterrestrials visiting Earth in flying saucers must come from a socially and scientifically advanced civilization to master interplanetary travel, and that the working class should welcome the alien invaders as their liberators.
Is that what I can get on the line?
Sure. Hell yeah.
That would be fucking awesome.
This is very important to me because I am incredibly sincere about my belief that UFOs are a legitimate phenomenon. I'm agnostic about ETH, but...
No, I actually, being introduced to this theory and understanding the idea that, like, the one unifying factor that could possibly bring revolution would be the fact that there are outside forces watching us and saying, you've done fucked up.
Well,
and also, like, we all care about each other and we can have
He doesn't have the little green dot by his name on Facebook, so it's possible that we're not going to get him.
I was say, hit him up anyway, because bring him on, and if nothing else, we'll talk to him about video production on YouTube with a VHS camera.
This is your Comrade Communicator coming to you live and on tape from my mother's basement.
Yeah, well, let's see if we can get him. If we don't get him this time, I'll either have him on my podcast or you guys can invite him on yours some other day. But here's what I think about the Posadists. Well, look, first of all, the thing to understand about Posadist group, and I'm not sure if it's more than him, is that it's a critique of the left. It's not a legitimate political movement or even a sect.
Yeah,
it's a critique.
I talked about this with you the last time you were here, and you said that they were doing a bit. Is that?
Yeah, they certainly were at left forum. Yeah,
like this is.
Yeah, I mean, if you
this is
listen to
enormously
the whole
upsetting
podcast,
to me.
If you listen to the whole interview I did with him, I do 2 interviews with him. One's about 15 minutes long, where he's in his character of Comrade Communicator.
Comrade, yeah, which he adopts on YouTube.
he's describing the sect that he belongs to and that he believes in, which is a Posadist sect, and he gives me a whole spiel about the Posadist ideology and their perspective. On the other hand, after that, he comes on as himself, and he describes what the project is really about. And the project is really about how the left, the revolutionary left, is a lot like Bud Hopkins, that we're kind of waiting for something to happen that we don't quite believe in. We're looking for something outside of ourselves to come into our rescue, and that when we do act, we don't act in any kind of consistent and rational way. That, in fact, if you look at Posadism, it is at least ideologically consistent and has an A and a B and a C. It can tell a story about how we get to revolution, where most of the time on the left you have, that whole gnome collecting underwear story where it's like collect underwear, ? Profit.
I don't get it. You see, phase 1, collect underpants. Phase 2, phase 3, profit. Oh, I get it. No, you don't, fat ass.
It's like do activism, ? Revolution is sort of the left's approach. And with Posadism, it's, get the information about the UFOs and make sure that disclosure happens, welcome our communist comrades from the stars, invite them and help them create communist utopia on Earth. Every piece of it is there. You don't have a big ? in the middle. Unfortunately, it's all, it hinges on an absurdity.
But they're doing irony.
Well, this is the first time in a long time
we're all irony bros here. So
the first
bras. What do you call me? I don't know.
Bro,
But it's not irony just for irony's sake.
No.
It's saying, look, we need to rethink our project. We need to have a revolutionary politics that is better than a UFO cult.
Right, and it's also, God, it was like, this is the first time in almost 2 years that we've had a South Park reference on this show.
Yeah.
No, I think part of it, and I think, God, what was it? It was, I can't remember if it was it was published in either in Jacobin or the Guardian, but talking about like how it was someone connecting the 100-year anniversary, the centenary, I think it's called, of the Russian Revolution with Star Trek. And it mentioned halfway through, like, they actually do mention Posadism, because the key moment of Star Trek was, as rendered in the film First Contact, was the first contact where after a planetary devastation, World War III, it's also after the eugenics war.
The eugenics wars.
Yeah.
Yes.
Where at some point, the alien species come down, and in the form of a Vulcan scout ship, after tracing a warp signal, created by the inventor Zefram Cochrane.
Yes, thank you.
I saw this. I saw
So
first.
great.
Science Daddy.
I saw First Contact at the
My
theater
favorite.
when I was a junior in university. What can I say? This stuff goes
the guy
deep.
from Babe.
Yeah, James Cromwell.
James Cromwell.
Yeah,
I love him.
Who he deposed Charles I. But yeah, no, like I said, the plot of the Star Wars mythology is that nuclear war comes down, aliens show up, and they help elevate us out of our current misery into this, eventually, by the time Next Generation comes around, into this post-scarcity economy, post-scarcity society.
I just want to remind you of the Enterprise episode where it was the Dark Mirror episode where they show that scene, but they show the alien, Vulcans coming down and all of these Americans in the middle of the woods shooting them.
Right.
To death.
Sorry.
So mean.
Well, no, it's
the Mirror Universe.
Yeah, Mirror Universe stuff, which connects up to Star Trek Discovery and all sorts of stuff.
I've got a phone number for. He says he can join our call if we can call him.
Yay!
Punch him in.
This is Comrade Communicator of the Intergalactic Workers League speaking to you.
Nice to meet you, Comrade Communicator. You're very much welcome here.
Yes, welcome, Comrade. My name's Jeremy. You are have been dragged into our both live and Skyped in Pac Northwest pod recording for a Wednesday evening. Thank you for being amenable to talking to us.
Oh yes, thank you very much. I'm getting very faint audio right now, though.
You want to turn up your?
Should we turn up our input on Skype?
Let me see if I can.
Oh, it's probably them.
Oh, wait a minute.
They're a little soft.
Oh my lord! I thought I had it up all the way. Now I hear you. Now I hear you fine.
Okay, can you hear us fine? Okay, good.
I've done a lot of Skype.
Let's see. One of the things that we did want that hi, how you doing? I'm Jeremy. I'm the host. This is you are dialed into a Portland. How do we describe this thing? A Portland-based, a Portland podcast of talking to people about their cultural obsessions, and also giving some recommendations of our own type of podcast. But in the last year and a half, it's been far more like trying to mix both talking about pop culture, but also a hell of a lot of much more lefty politics. One of so tonight we've been talking earlier this evening. We were discussing we were talking about UFOs in the from the mid 20th century onward in American history, and we finally got to the point where we wanted to talk about, let's just say, and we figured
Posadism.
Yes, we figured you would be the best expert to bring on to discuss, let's just say, the basic precepts of American Posadism, and like how do you connect both UFOs and communism, Marxism, communism, socialism, whatever you want to call it.
Trotskyism.
Yes. At one point, yes. How would alien trots look like, and like what would a visitor trot newspaper look like when they approach you on the street to give them 50 cents?
Well, to begin with, there is an assumption here that the focus on extraterrestrial contact and revolution sparked by extraterrestrial contact is somehow outside of the general tradition of orthodox communism or of orthodox Marxism. This is not the case. This falls very much into the tradition of catastrophist communism or catastrophist Marxism, which is most Marxists. It's certainly every revolutionary Marxist. We all expect some kind of outside intervention, some kind of catastrophe. A revolution is fundamentally a catastrophe, or is at least sparked by a social catastrophe, according to most historical theorists. And we expect that to create the preconditions necessary for building a new society, for overthrowing capitalism. Now, we have accelerationists. That's a very popular trend down the left right now.
Right, that's
certainly that's a kind of catastrophist communism that requires absolutely no worker intervention.
Are you saying we live in the zone?
Yes.
Natasha, please repeat your question.
Oh, I was going to say, are you saying you live in the zone now, and that there may have been an extraterrestrial visit, and we're just not aware of it?
I think it's almost certain. It's almost certain that there's been some contact. I mean, there's been recent government disclosures, though a very limited one. We suspect we might have a Posadist Edward Snowden within the deep state.
We can only.
We're currently trying to reach out our feelers, but we haven't heard back yet. They're being very cautious. But
I think you were saying something very important about accelerationism, though. That Posadism and accelerationism have something in common, in so much as they don't require workers or really any everyday people to be involved.
A mass
in order to bring on a revolution.
Oh yes, so though this is a vulgar interpretation of Posadism. Now,
damn those mechanical Posadists.
We're fundamentally Trotskyists. So we do believe in incorporating disclosure in the minimal program. We believe in using worker power as much as it can be used to get to the point where we have proletarian contact. We've had contact. We've certainly had some kind of state contact. Both the Soviet Union, the chief of the deformed worker states, the deformed worker having been Joseph Stalin at one time.
Interesting subject. Yeah.
And the United States, they've both had some kind of contact. They've both at least had programs that we have information about. The Soviet with their famous extrasense program. Americans tried to imitate that poorly with our own ESP programs. But there's been contact, but there hasn't been proletarian contact. We feel that the space comrades have either been deceived, certainly in certain situations captured their technology studied, but we have not had proletarian contact, which we believe is necessary. It's a necessary is a necessary precondition for
Scaring the
sparking the
normies.
world revolution.
Sorry.
Oh yes, my apology.
No, I didn't mean to interrupt you. It was my fault. But I was just going to say, you have to scare the normies.
Well, don't we need to make a distinction between the government's projects that were involved with things like extrasensory perception, or the famous work that John B. Alexander did that got turned into the Men Who Stare at Goats project, an actual UFO/extraterrestrial research? I mean, you're sort of conflating the two
believe
there.
that these are in fact connected, and why shouldn't they be? They're both state programs that delve into the very things that the state and generally speaking the surrounding scientific apparatus, the technocratic apparatus that tells us what is real and what is not, what is legitimate knowledge and what is not legitimate knowledge, that these are programs that study the things and use the very things that they're trying to tell us are not real. We in fact believe that not the state, the bourgeois state, doesn't simply conduct UFO research, doesn't simply conduct extrasensory research, but in fact, when no one is looking, state economists make use of dialectical materialism. These are all things that they use.
I mean, I think that's a fair point. How long?
You and I spoke at the Left Forum last year, and at the time you were very convinced that the reason Hillary Clinton lost the election was because of her connection to John Podesta, and Podesta was committed to full disclosure, and
he got her to promise it. He got her to promise it on air.
Right, he got her to promise full disclosure
on mic,
and then because of that, the powers that be, whether they're within the NSA or the CIA or in Russian intelligence, yes, all of these agencies came together to make sure that she did not get elected and that Trump was made president. However, in recent months, disclosure has happened despite this on a certain level. There have been reports in the New York Times of government programs investigating UFOs, and there has been, I think, a substantial change in the climate around UFO research and contact. What do you think has gone on politically to make this possible, and how seriously do you take the kind of disclosure that's already occurred that we've seen in the New York Times in the last couple of months?
In fact, we believe that events after the election confirm our pre-election analysis and post-election analysis of the forces that lined up behind the anti-disclosure agenda. This we believe is basically blowback. This is a backfiring of, if you can imagine, there are patriotic Americans. You know, this is not our ideology, but we understand the ideology of the government bureaucrat and the military man, who certainly see the cooperation with Russian agencies and American agencies all to subvert the bourgeois electoral process. They see this as an attack, and they have now connected this directly to UFO disclosure, and they've struck a blow for it. These are our Posadist Snowdens, and we must support them. And we must encourage them to release more information and hope that that the big they have not gotten to our comrades within the system yet.
If I may interrupt, Doug and Comrade, how do you separate the? You mentioned jumping off of a thing you mentioned. How do you separate? I think. Sorry, I missed your exact wording, but it was. How do you separate the? Was it the bourgeois? Was it bourgeois voting or bourgeois campaigning from the government systems itself? If in
terms of
like, I don't know, contrasting ideology or contrasting identities.
What do you mean exactly? I'm not sure I get it.
Well, no, you mentioned what was it? As if the bourgeois campaigning was somehow separate
the electoral
from
system.
The electoral system. Yes, the bourgeois electoral system was somehow separate from the government systems.
Oh no, I mean to a certain degree, when the right talks about deep state, and if we take that to mean simply the permanent unelected bureaucracy that is necessary to run every modern state, and that accrues its own institutional interests, then that's the deep state. And to a certain extent, it exists both with and sort of independently from and supporting and also sometimes against whatever administration happens to be in power. And I think there's a certain point to it. If you're talking about how bureaucratic continuity subverts democracy, then that is a kind of deep state. We're not conspiracists. We're on the up and up.
Okay. Jacob, did you have a question?
Well, I was going to ask, I am sympathetic to the arguments with regards to the deep state, but doesn't that go against your previous arguments with regards to Podesta and Hillary? I mean, why do we even think that the president necessarily is aware of the truth about UFOs, considering the fact that a lot of this has been shunted off into deep state special access projects?
Oh, the president almost certainly is not aware of it. However,
then why does it matter whether or not Hillary gets elected?
Hmm?
Why would it matter if Hillary doesn't get access to that information?
It is because the president is not aware of it. However, I think that if the president demanded the information, and if the president issued a public executive order for full disclosure of certain projects, it would be difficult for them to deny it. They would have to, at the very least, claim that these are very sensitive top secret projects, and thus in some way tip their hand.
What's to stop them from just erasing the tapes?
Yeah, I mean, they destroyed the records for MK Ultra back in the day. They
put something forward that was some sort of like a pseudo story about weather balloons. Why would an executive order actually have the power to unearth deep state secrets?
Well, special access programs, by definition, actually fall outside of the traditional national security framework. So I think that seems hard for me to believe. And I mean, we have had, I believe Bill Clinton said that he pushed like hell to try to get to the bottom of this, and basically was told one or two things, but never got the full story. I know Nixon looked into it. And there's some theories about Kennedy.
What about Jimmy Carter?
I was to say, the bit of history I wanted to bring up was
Jimmy fucking Carter.
Well, it was President Carter.
He got attacked by a rabbit.
yes, he did, and his brother.
That is another Jimmy Carter story.
Yeah, he got it. And thanks to the help of Dan Aykroyd, his brother got his own line of beer. Yeah. But definitely,
Can I just say that the only introduction to UFOs I have is Dan Aykroyd.
Where they got the little gopher in Caddyshack?
I don't know.
No, Dan Aykroyd connection.
No, well, I think that is the.
It's a Bill Murray connection.
That and the fact that it was about the same time that the gopher in Caddyshack was partially designed by John Dykstra, because the fact that Remember Blues Brothers the film, or the fact
Who doesn't?
We are
the fact
wildly off topic.
No, trust me,
This is the point of our
all connects.
podcast. I'm sorry.
Okay, you got to remember. Remember 1979, 1980. John Landis's friends, the director of the Blue. Okay, at
It's
one
all
point,
connected.
Well, no,
it's all connected together.
No.
Hollywood, UFOs.
Well, you got to remember
government, they're all in on it.
Oh, yeah.
Do you know who was gonna? Do you know who was very close?
It's an Antifa film.
Do you know? Yeah, literally.
Kind of true.
No, it's literally true. Who was very, very close to marrying Dan Aykroyd and was hanging out with the SNL crowd way back when?
Are you talking about Carrie Fisher?
Yes. Okay.
Because she was actually not with Dan Aykroyd. She was with.
Well, she was with Paul Simon, but she was also hanging out with.
No, she was deep in with. God damn it! Tell me the another name of the Blues Brothers. I'm drunk.
Belushi? Was she with the Belushi?
She was with Belushi. She was
Really?
doing coke with Belushi. Yeah.
Oh, okay.
She was fucking Belushi, and
wow,
that's how she ended up in the movie.
Well,
I mean, I'm sorry, I'm wearing a Carrie Fisher ring right now.
Wow, Belushi just got a lot cooler.
Sorry, but like she's no wait. Carrie Fisher just.
They both got cooler.
Yeah, exactly.
Let's bring this together because so Belushi and Aykroyd and also Paul Simon were connected to Carrie Fisher, who was connected to not
Star
only
Wars,
well,
which is
Frank
connected
Oz,
to Aliens, which is connected to the U.S. government program.
We're not going to. We're not going to go down. We're not going to.
Not to mention, if you say that Star Wars is just aliens that haven't been to Earth, you're forgetting that E.T. and Star Wars are officially set in the same universe. The E.T. aliens were.
We're going to start telling the Star Wars canon right now because you do not want to go down that road. But that is a good one. That is a good one.
We talked about this earlier off mic. Okay, hang on, real quick. I bring this up for one thing about Caddyshack. The groundhog in Caddyshack was partially designed by John Dykstra. I believe it was John Dykstra's animal effects crew. At some point they were shooting Caddyshack in 79, 80. About the same time that they were both working on both Blues Brothers and on Empire, and that is how the in fact, if you, I think somewhere on the memorial commemorative DVD Blu-ray, they have the original trailer for Caddyshack, which has the original groundhog, which looks horrible. Because
they all look horrible. It's okay.
Well, no. The thing is, they look horrible.
There's one that doesn't look horrible.
Well,
yeah, exactly. That's the whole point.
Well, the thing is, the later version was I think John Dykstra and his crew. I'm remembering, God, I'm going back through, just decades of Beer Feud fog through early aughts DVD watching. It was John Dykstra and the Lucasfilm puppet crew helped design a new and improved. Fully, almost Greg the Bunny
animatronic. Are you trying to say animatronic?
Yeah, animatronic Greg the Bunny groundhog to be on film, and that is how the groundhog became a much more prominent character in Caddyshack.
We auditioned live animals for the Gopher. They brought in every kind of rodent that was trainable or usable. And they kept trying to sell us on the idea of a ferret. Why not have an animated creature that has life in the film, especially if it was hip and funny? So the job went to John Dykstra.
Somebody called me one day and said, "Can you build a gopher?"
Special effects whiz kid John Dykstra had recently won 2 Oscars for his work on Star Wars.
It had to have the ability to make anthropomorphic kinds of expressions, smiling, frowning, confusion, surprise. He needed to be able to spit water, cough, smoke, and he had to be physically adept, be able to dance and to move around.
I determined early that the ears gave the most expression, right? That you could, curiosity, anger, what's going on over here, there, and that by changing the profile of the head, I could get a lot of emotion. And then I also wired it so that he could snarl to the left or snarl to the right or, bare his teeth entirely.
It's a gopher world, and we're just living in it.
They created all this wonderful world of the gopher, and at first I thought, oh man, this is they're polluting my work of art here somehow with this animation. But Turned out to be funny.
Which was, the sequel of which starred Dan Aykroyd in the earlier version had a bunch of like his co-stars on SNL. The world is a wide ass place. Sometimes we are able to tie it all together.
Can I just jump in here and say that there's a...
I feel like we're wasting Comrade Communicator, though, because I don't know. Comrade, do you have anything to say about the Hollywood connection to UFO disclosure?
What Hollywood... And by the way, first I would like to answer a question that was posed before we digress. And that's,
even better.
And that's how much a presidential demand, how much disclosure that will even bring. We're actually not sure about that, but we have noticed that whenever there seems to be a push for it, and a serious push, and in this case, we would likely have a major American ufologist as the White House chief of staff, Podesta. That is where she would put him, and that would at the very least riles things up, and when they get riled up, they make mistakes and they piss some of their own underlings off, and their underlings leak.
But Podesta served at a senior level underneath Bill Clinton and Obama.
We're not saying that the president demanding it will necessarily give us full disclosure, but at the very least, it rankles them, it rattles them, and it creates some useful chaos.
So where did the leak come from this time? I mean, it wasn't from Trump. It wasn't a demand.
No, it certainly wasn't. It certainly wasn't. It certainly wasn't. The president doesn't know anything, and we don't just mean about UFO disclosure. This is a broad general statement.
Yeah.
This is
categorical statement. Yeah.
He is the man who knew too little. It is
another Bill Murray film.
His blessing. Oh,
one of my favorites, actually.
It all comes together. But the Hollywood connection. Or did I? I'm a little stoned. I'm sorry.
No, it's all right.
No, I'm usually stoned every day of my life. So
we've had a few.
For God's sake.
You're remembering correctly that the question is, who are the players here? Does Hollywood, or do some people in Hollywood know the true story? How deeply should we go down the rabbit hole of looking at major films or the history of cinema to try to figure out what's known and what's not known? Who knows what, that kind of thing.
Can I just jump in here and say
we again, we're not conspiracy theorists.
No.
We look at this in a rational and analytical way. What you could find by looking at films in terms of how they discuss aliens and UFOs and communism isn't so much any hidden information that Hollywood knows. That's a bourgeois myth that actors
they're
know
only
anything.
liberals anyway.
In fact, but it does show us what we could see what kind of state pressure there probably was. Notice in the period when anti-communist propaganda was fairly strong, so was propaganda against the space comrades. This shows that when the state applied pressure for the one, either Hollywood knew to push both buttons at once, or the state asked for both of these forces to be demonized. And we think it's because the people pulling the strings behind the state policy on American media. They know that there is a connection between communism and UFOs.
Well, and we know it's a well-established fact at this point that the government actually did intervene in science fiction publications relating to the nuclear bomb. This is very well established at this point. So they were actively suppressing information.
Robert Heinlein wrote something that looked very much like this new super weapon that they were building, and they wanted to see if he'd been talking to someone with loose lips. It turns out he was just a damned good science fiction writer. Is that the incident you're talking about?
There's actually more than one. And I would also point out that Truman himself didn't find out until the very last minute about the bomb.
Yeah.
It had been in production for years, and he had no idea.
God, I will say at one point, just to break off, how weird would 1944, 1945 have been had FDR had chosen Henry Wallace as his VP instead of Truman. Anyway.
That
really
would have
deep.
been, Henry Wallace was if he was a Marxist, he would have been a Freudian Marxist. He certainly had some interesting esoteric leanings.
I'm all for the Freudian Marxism right here. Sorry.
Oh yes, most certainly.
Well, I would just say that the aliens represent a psychological precept of this external father-like figure coming in and destroying everything that we've built in order to make our lives better.
And
it would hopefully be mothers, though. If it was xenomorphs, it would be mothers.
They're the opposite of the father. Oh, sorry.
No, it's just definitely the opposite. I was going to say at some point, and we can even connect with our earlier conversation that we had earlier this evening. If we the Freudian connection, if we wanted to mention Lacan, and from Freud to Lacan, where do you go? You wind up with a certain Schnuffy.
Mm-hmm. Can I just add something real quick? I actually
please do.
Wasn't going to mention this, but I actually just found out that this has been confirmed by Spielberg himself.
Mm-hmm.
They did a special screen of E.T. at the White House.
What, Carter era, yeah.
No. This is Reagan.
This is Reagan era?
Reagan,
yeah.
Was it Nancy, too?
Okay.
And
probably
Reagan,
the special edition, right?
Well, here's the part, which is that afterwards Reagan, and Spielberg himself is confirming this, said that Reagan came up to him and announced, there are a number of people in this room who know that everything on that screen is absolutely true.
I heard that it went down differently. I heard that afterwards Reagan was so impressed with the film that he was going to call his new missile defense program the ET program, and then Spielberg explained that wasn't the point of the film, and that's why he went with Star Wars.
Well, I mean that's cute.
Wait. We can talk about Spielberg going into anything, but it's not going to be going to Star Wars. I mean, yes, he was circle jerking with George Lucas, but he was not responsible for that, and he was responsible for War of the Worlds, which came out in 2005. Yeah, I just podcasted about that.
Well, he worked closely with actual UFO researchers to put together Close Encounters of the Third Time.
Exactly.
Third Kind.
No, he's been obsessed with the aliens from the beginning, and so has Lucas. And the whole point is, like, they did a good job of them, like, in terms of tapping into these cultural zeitgeist.
I will say this, regardless of anything else that we mentioned tonight, what a really genius / fucking weird way to get Francois Truffaut on the screens of 1,000, American multiplex screens by we'll cast him as the French UFO, expert.
Truffaut is wonderful to work with. He's really amazing. He's amazing because he's so simple. He's as simple as his films. I thought I was going to be a very, very complicated man who had spoken down to the cinema to make these rather, tender, romantic, light, wonderful films about the human persona. And instead, he was exactly like his movies. And that's what set me back so far. Was I kept talking to Francois like he was more than the man who made Jules and Jim, and he's not. He's Jules. He's a fantastic guy. He really is. He loves movies more than anybody I've ever met in my life. You can take all this new Hollywood bullshit and get all of us guys sitting in a room together, and he puts us away. He knows more about movies than any of us ever will.
Did he try to be influential in any way in terms of how you handled
No,
scenes?
he didn't. He made suggestions occasionally, and I wanted him to make more, but he would just make them when he felt comfortable about making them. One day he said, Stephen, and he'd bring me over and he'd show me a bunch of extras when the camera was not on them, what they were doing, picking their noses, scratching their rear ends. He said, you must capture this. I said, Francois, I can't capture somebody picking their nose while this Renaissance fair is approaching from out of the Northwest. Come on, And because Truffaut has this very devilly sense of humor, that he will pick things out in the background and fasten on them and just not leave it. He with binoculars spend hours watching the extras 100 feet away. He loves that.
That's based on a real person.
He's
what was the guy's? What was
I can't remember his name, but I know who you're talking about.
He was the John Keel.
John what?
John Keel.
Oh yeah. Okay.
Avez-vous des maux de tête, des migraines?
Having headaches, migraines.
Yeah. Irritation des yeux et du sinus?
An irritation in your eyes and your sinuses.
Yeah. Des démangeaisons, des allergies?
You have hives? You have allergies?
Des brûlures sur le visage et sur le corps?
You're burning on your face and on your body?
Yes. Who are you people? Look at this. Yeah, I got one just like it in my living room. Who are you people?
Je pensais...
Oui, tu connais la montagne. Oui, je connais.
Monsieur Neri, please, one more question. N'avez-vous pas fait récemment une rencontre?
Have you recently had a close encounter?
Une rencontre plutôt inhabituelle?
A close encounter with something very unusual.
Who are you people?
I just want to thank you both for introducing me to the history and depth of Posadism, but also its new form, and of the fact that I had no idea that it was so based on disclosure, like this whole idea of people know.
I will as the as the like somewhat host, I think we should bring up at one point. I think we should spend a second just to discuss, if anybody can. I think we should actually mention the biographical information and talk about the life of Jose Posadas and the shit that he had to go through before his.
I believe it was Juan Posadas.
Was it Juan? Okay.
Yeah, it was Juan.
I couldn't remember if it was Juan or Jose, but okay. Comrade, could you please talk about Juan or a brief sketch?
Oh, yes. He was the son of Italian immigrants in Argentina. He was a working class guy. He lived in. He began his life in the early 20th century. He was I believe, a shoemaker, and his political involvement began in the labor movement. He organized the movement of shoemakers and leather workers in his town, and actually, I believe that was after he was quite a beloved local star soccer player. But he was a man of many talents, truly a Renaissance man.
A soccer player, you say, much like David Icke.
Oh yes. He was a soccer player. He was an athlete. And after this, he went to work, and in the workshop, and then he became a union organizer, and then he became a candidate for a local office from a socialist electoral party. Eventually, he joined a more radical party that affiliated with the burgeoning Trotskyist movement at the time. And he rose up through the Trotskyist movement and became one of the premier Trotskyist leaders in the world, for a time the premier Trotskyist leader in South America. In fact, during Castro's time, during the early years of Castro's revolution, the Cuban Trotskyists were in fact Posadists, and they were purged after they tried storming Guantanamo Bay.
Oh dear!
Oh wow!
That was not the best idea. So
we can count the Castros in among the forces of red terrestrialism. Now, at some point in the 50s, Jay Posadas adopted this is the something that actually split the international Trotskyist movement, or at the very least prevented it from coming back together after its first split, is the nuclear question, where Jay Posadas put forward a doctrine that nuclear war will be revolutionary war. And this is often misunderstood as championing of nuclear war, where, again, it's Posadas beginning to embrace a catastrophist communism in seeing new conditions, forming new preconditions for revolution, rather than simply looking at pre-nuclear conditions for revolution.
They're not advocating for it. They're just saying that now we've reached this point in humanity, and when you reach that point in humanity, then you're called out by other species.
Well, that didn't come until later. The UFO angle didn't come up until 1968. And just one last word on the nuclear war. Che Guevara explicitly called for nuclear war. He believed that Cuba should bomb the New York, in fact, the city where I am right now. And for some reason, Guevarism and the Castros and none of that gets pegged with this pro-nuclear war thing, because they're solid terrestrialists. Really? This is the real. This is the nuclear war championing smear is a terrestrialist smear against Posadas. But yes, in '68, Posadas went further and wrote a now famous essay, his most widely read and most widely known work about. It had a very long title, but Saucers Socialism and the Future of Mankind, I guess, is a summary of the title.
Wow.
And
that's pretty cool.
You should all read it. And it talked about, even though it's the translations that exist are kind of wonky, and honestly, it's some weird shit. The premise, the main theses are that the saucers that have been visiting Earth must be from advanced socialist societies. This can be this can be justified either in a teleological way. You know, this idea of history developing in stages. Certainly, this must be a higher stage of history. But there are more dialectical ways of accounting for this, and then to come to this conclusion. Any society that would a society like ours will have destroyed itself before they could send out these sorts of craft along such distances. If capitalism persists on Earth for more than the next 50 years, we won't be sending out any saucers.
That's very
everything
true.
that we know
We'll
about
be sending
life and about
Teslas into
civilization,
space.
we must draw from Earth, and this is the experience that we have with capitalism. A system, at the very least, they must have a system that is not capitalist, but at a technological base above ours. Oh, sorry.
No, I'm just saying, like, resource management wise, if you think about it, it's very simple. You have what you have, and if you don't share it among the collective, then you end up with one guy shooting himself into space and
like the opening,
dying.
Yeah, like the opening to Heavy Metal, the film. Yeah, we need to. I think we need to continue this this conversation with the Comrade again in the future, because there's there's a lot of good stuff here. However, my own pro wrestling kayfabe breaking upbringing requires me to ask certain questions, and unless anybody has any other questions, I'm gonna it's time to transition real quick. Where'd you do your undergrad at?
Brooklyn College. What I did of it, I did it at Brooklyn College.
Cool. What did you go for?
You know, I didn't stick around long enough to declare a major. It was probably going to be history or philosophy.
No, not too bad, not too bad. I did, born and raised in Flint. I escaped to Ann Arbor when I was 18, to double major in engineering, and had they had minors at Michigan, I would have minored in philosophy.
Nice.
And nice to meet you. I'm Nat, and you've convinced me, I think, a little bit more towards the Posadist caucus. I am actually going to. I followed you guys tonight.
Oh, thank you.
Yeah, well, I mean, dolphins. Every girl likes dolphins.
Yeah, I need to.
Being horse girl, you know, like you love horses when you're a teenager,
nice.
But you, as an adult, you love dolphins. All right. No, not. Are you recording this, Jeremy? You are recording this. Okay. You've
been a co-host on the show for over a year. You know I do not turn this thing off.
I'm just gonna say thank you for your work, Comrade. And
thank you for having me.
Yeah, I want to hear more about. I want to hear more about Trotskyism, because I
don't know about that. I got a newspaper that the goddamn trots at the local airplane.
I want to hear more salting.
I just realized you guys asked me something earlier, or made a joke about newspapers that I meant to address.
Yes.
Now Posadism, or at least Posadism of the 21st century that we adhere to. We've replaced newspapers with memes. We've updated that. Like if Lenin was alive today, if Lenin was active and alive today, God forbid, he
would use dolphin gifs.
He'd use memes. He'd say fuck newspapers, guys.
Yeah, he'd be a poster.
Memes is the way. That's what the workers are reading.
Shit posting
a
YouTube
channel? Would Lenin have a YouTube channel?
Yeah, I certainly hope so.
Oh yeah, he would.
You know, probably. You know, like he'd be like. Just have a whole set piece set up where he'd be standing on on that train car or whatever, and he'd have his hat like in the picture, you know.
Hey everybody, thanks for tuning into my channel again. I'm about like 100 miles outside of Petrograd, and I'm just checking in with y'all. It's like,
here's my comrades.
Yeah, like, subscribe, and share with your rest of your comrades, and it's I know.
Review us on Soviet iTunes.
Yeah, I know the war is pretty bad, but
do you think he would turn
on monetization? Here's the question: Would he feed into the squatting Slav meme? Would he
no, everybody does,
would he
actually.
make that part of his image? Would he wear a tracksuit?
I can say you. I can say.
What do you? Yes, we need a rejuvenated, revitalized Lenin just saying "bro" a lot, like he was in the Matt Fraction Hawkeye series. Yeah. Yep. Hey, bro, how you doing, bro? Let me tell you about.
It's a dog. It's a dog.
We need
Give
to
me dog.
We need to overthrow Kerensky, bro.
I can say this because my name is Natasha, so I don't seem like stereotype. I grew up with Russians.
Okay, two things. One, does anyone have any recommendations? Shit to read, listen, watch.
As your normie.
Can I make a recommendation?
Go ahead. Sorry.
I'm gonna say, as your normie asshole, I'm watching Altered Carbon, and I really enjoy it because I like Richard K. Morgan, and I'm an asshole that way. And yeah, roast me next session. You can find me online at metamachina.com or at Ashes for Foxes on Twitter and Tumblr.
Jacob, you have anything, or?
Yeah, I'd recommend a podcast I like called The Paracast, the gold standard of paranormal radio, that actually covers a lot of these topics and has actually had David M. Jacobs on more than once. I'm not sure if he's a guest in good standing at the moment. There's been some beef there.
The problem with the Paracast...
That is a real problem, I'm not going to lie. They have a permit. I can skip past the ads, so it's not that bad. But the content pretty solid depending on the week. And I'm a really big fan of Chris O'Brien, who's been digging into cattle mutilations, and that dude has just done phenomenal work. I'm really impressed by what he does. And you can follow me on Twitch. Just search for Jacob Mercy.
Comrade and or Doug, please go.
Okay, well, I would suggest that people who have been listening to this podcast go to their local library or to their local bookstore and find a book called After the Saucers Landed, which is all about contact, that I wrote a few years ago and that was nominated for the Philip K. Dick Award. And
that we forgot to bring up.
It's hated by many, but loved by a few.
I noticed you killed John Mack on the first page. That's pretty hardcore.
yeah, I did. He committed suicide.
Yeah, jeez.
Yeah, I'm still. I'm still only about 2/3 of the way through it. So, I did enjoy the point where at one point the story this story cuts to 90s Southeast Portland.
Yeah, right.
Comrade, do you have anything, if you're still on the line, anything, any recommendations and or plugs and or ways that folks can contact you?
Oh, yes. Well, beginning with plugs, our Facebook page is the Intergalactic Workers League. Just search for that, or it's facebook.com/Intergalactic Workers. And our YouTube channel is Posadist Rebel News 2. We haven't updated in a while, but we will soon, God willing, get my tech in order. But as for cultural recommendations, I will recommend a board game. I recommend that everyone go out and play a game called Between Two Cities. I played this game recently, and I was amazed by the degree to which it melded cooperation and competition as game mechanics and as motivators, and it's actually a very interesting way. It might give you a new perspective on human social dynamics, I think, if you're into board games at all and haven't played a game with such a mechanic. And I think that board games very often don't get enough credit, because I think they should be, especially the great ones, considered in the same category as books and films.
How do you feel about Monopoly: Cheaters Edition?
You know, I haven't played it, but I've seen I've seen it going around, and it actually sounds like it's incorporating a very interesting social game into Monopoly, and using something very clever, using something that we've all done as kids in Monopoly. I think that's I kind of, when I was a kid, I loved Monopoly, then I kind of came to loathe it.
Right.
As I discovered other games, but this actually sounds like it could bring a lot of fun back into Monopoly.
Yeah, fair enough.
But I don't know. Like I think it's hard for me to look at Monopoly in its in what its originator game was meant to be as that kind of social criticism, because it's such an icon now. I can't imagine what playing Monopoly, never having played it before or been familiar with its tropes, would have been like. Well, when I was a kid, it was pretty great, but that the injustice of capitalism angle kind of escaped me.
Yeah.
In fact, a lot of Russian kids in the early post-Soviet period and late Soviet period would make their own bootleg cardboard monopolies with their own rules, and mostly the same rules, but different pieces, and they were all like 1,000 times more aspirationally capitalistic.
Oh dear.
So to a certain extent, that is actually the greatest gauge of how Monopoly, the degree to which it was, its originator game was a tool of anti-capitalist criticism, how much it's been co-opted, where it's even resonated it's especially resonated, in fact, in the post-Soviet sphere. It's an example, actually, of both how Monopoly in that context failed to send this message, and how the Soviet socialist project kind of turned against itself.
Gotcha.
Oh, this is ending on a terrible note. I'm sorry.
No, that's okay. Okay, Doug, you went, and I went, and no, I ain't going yet.
Everyone, I think. Oh, you should go, Jim.
You need to go.
Yeah. Last thing, all I'm gonna say is, thank you everybody for listening to God knows whatever I'm gonna have to carve this into. Our theme song is provided by the mysterious Breakfaster Cerealo. You can find us on the internet at soundcloud.com/givingthemic. Find us on Facebook at facebook.com/givingthemic. Any comments, questions, blah blah blah. Subscribe, and share, and contact us at givingthemic@gmail.com. My only recommendation is an album by one of the greatest bands of all time called Husker Du. The late drummer / co-songwriter of that band, named of Grant Hart, who died. He passed on in mid-late of 2017, wrote an extremely thematically relevant song called Books About UFOs. Get on your Spotify and search for Husker Du's song called Books About UFOs. Oh, and also a band, two bands, one band from England called Spaceman 3, the other band called Flying Saucer Attack. And other than that, I believe that is, I think that's all we got. I want to thank everybody for staying up late on a Wednesday? It's a Wednesday night for whatever this has turned into. It has been far more than I ever expected, far more entertaining than I ever expected. I need more beer, but whatever. And yeah, and I think if y'all have any final concluding words, please offer them for posterity. And go.
I'm not going to go first.
The UFOs are real. The government is lying to you. Google Gary McKinnon. Google Paul Benowitz. The truth is out there. Don't believe what they tell you. What they're going to do is they're going to try to turn it into a joke, and when that doesn't work, they're going to pretend that they already told you.
Anybody else?
I just wanted to say, yes, long live Posadist, long live Comrade High Commander.
I'm going to just repeat that. Long live Posadist, long live High Commander.
Awesome. And, yeah. Thank you, everybody. Thank you guys for being up for talking about whatever idiocy we wanted to talk about. This has been a hell of a lot of fun. Thank you, and good night.
editing services provided by Entertainment Unlimited. Visit us at euavp.com.
All right, for the trying to come up with a rough format for the show tonight.
Okay. So section 1, I talk about UFOs.
Yeah, I want to hear.
Section 2, I answer questions about UFOs. Section 3, I explain a plan for how we can get disclosure.
Can we talk about the Phoenix Lights?
No.
Okay.
Yes.
Why not?
I can talk about the Phoenix Lights.
I can talk about the Phoenix Lights.
So it sounds like you don't really need us to
so.
be here, except for section 2.
I just need you guys to ask me questions. That'll be fine.
Do you want us to? You want to send us the questions you want us to ask ahead of time?
Actually, I think that's how they do it on Coast to Coast now.
Is that right?
Ha ha ha! George Norrie, burn. I don't know if anybody got that.
I did not.
I
no,
do.
I'm sorry.
I miss Ian Punnett.
Who was the first guy on Coast to Coast?
Art Bell.
Art Bell, who had a couple brief returns.
Yeah, I used to work in the 90s. I used to work at a physician's answering service where you take emergency calls.
Mm-hmm.
But then one of their clients was Art Bell, and we would take orders for his book. So, you get one, I'm pregnant and I think I'm in labor, or I'm having a heart attack, and then I want to order Art Bell's The Quickening. So it was kind of a weird job.
That sounds like an awesome job.
That actually sounds like an awesome job. I work in healthcare, so.
Yeah, it was all right, except, you get calls that you weren't prepared you weren't prepared to take, or you never got any training on how to evaluate calls, and the doctors were all assholes.
Oh, they always are.
The worst was this neurologist who was like a child neurologist, like a pediatric neurologist, and he'd get tons of calls because his patients had severe problems.
Yeah.
And you'd call him up and say, well, your patient, Joe is having a seizure, 6-year-old Joe, and he would yeah, why are you bothering me about this? They always have seizures.
Oh, that's so mean.
So that's a bit overly callous for a pediatrician. Wow.
Yeah, he had real trouble because later on he ran into a ticketing, like a cop who was giving him a parking ticket. He ran into her with his car. He said, "You have no idea how much money I'm worth," and ran into her with his car. Which to me is
that's the epitome of his assholishness.
That seems very alpha.
That is the stupidest thing. You don't say to someone before you hit them with your car, "I'm worth a lot of money," and then hit them with your car.
Do you know who my father is?
Doing donuts on the lawn.
Jesus, what a dumb guy.
God. I hope he got destroyed by his own hubris.
I got lots of calls after that, patients canceling their appointments.
Good.
Jesus.
Yeah.
Sounds like there was another type of quickening there.
Yeah.
Jacob always makes me have to laugh outside of the mic because otherwise I just
no. Let him know.
Yeah, no, trust it. You've heard me on this show that you laugh on mic unless it's really loud, then you just pull back.
Well, I'm sorry, but I just spent the last 2 weeks editing 30 hours of editing for 30 hours. Obviously not podcasting for 30 hours.
Listen, you're not editing.
No, I'm the one who edits.
Well, no, I don't have to.
This is your opportunity
to be really an asshole.
Yeah, get in on it.
And
so do you do more than one podcast, or were you saying you were editing this podcast?
I host my own podcast, and then I'm lucky enough to be on this one, even though I'm just tolerated.
So what's your other podcast called?
It's called Meta Machina. It doesn't make any sense. It means meta and then machine in Russian, and it's just about us girls talking about how we like genre fiction and what we don't like about it. So it's very nice for us to do, and we're doing it from a very leftist, feminist perspective, which is great, but not that deep, unfortunately.
Yeah. Well, that sounds cool. I'll have to check you out. I have to get you on my podcast subscription list.
Oh gosh, thank you. But we do a lot of daddy jokes, and we talk about
Why is that a butt statement?
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's
yeah, but really, you won't like it, Doug, because we make fun of people just like you.
No,
It's
no,
okay, I
we
can
don't.
take it.
That's a feature, not a bug. Yeah, don't undersell yourself.
We're trying not to. I mean, actually, like, we've been really lucky. We've had a really great following really quickly, and it's mostly because we're a bunch of Star Wars hags. So, it works.
As a person with a podcast of veritably dozens, build an audience however you can. One question I did have is, how do you shoot the Posadist Rebel News? Are you shooting on like a handheld like VHS cam, or are you filtering through?
I shoot them on my shitty $38 Amazon tablet.
That's even better. Do you process it like?
I'm going to have a working laptop again one day, and I have a webcam for it, so it'll start looking slightly better at some point.
That's true socialism,
and maybe
by the
I'll
way.
be able to do them again.
I love those, by the way. You need to keep going with those. I'll send you.
I do. Thank you.
We'd also send you a better camera if you want it.
You can put up a Patreon. I donate to get more Posadist Rebel News.
I need to do that. That's how I need to maybe raise a little money for having a laptop again.
It was to say, yeah,
maybe get a job.
Well, there's that, but there's there's no like free geek or anything in like Brooklyn or anything where you can.
Oh, Jeremy, come on, that takes time and effort.
You have to go and buy them.
I don't need.
Well, no, you can volunteer. You can you don't have to like buy.
Wait, what is that? What's a free geek?
Free geek.
I don't know what that is.
Okay, in Portland, there's a place called Free Geek, and you can go and if you donate enough time repairing and assembling computers, you get one at the end of the process.
Right.
And,
that sounds fucking awesome. And yeah, the problem is I don't have those skills. My technical skills
they
are very
train
limited.
you. They train
Oh
you.
my God! Portland sounds like a worker's paradise. What
Come
the fuck
here.
am I doing?
Yeah, what the fuck are you doing in Brooklyn? Seriously.
I'm gonna need to check railway like friggin' freight rail maps now.
No. You just freight rail it all the way.
But I will say no. At some point, because Jacob was watching some of the videos every night.
This is your Comrade Communicator coming to you live and on tape from my mother's basement.
We fully thought. I mean, we fully thought that they were shot on. Like they were like what, like 4x3, like 320. 320p. Like this has to be VHS, and like if they were shot on like an Amazon Fire or something like wow, I don't know.
Yes. That is what I. I guess they're great for what they are. It's a $38 tablet. I think at least when they started selling them, they must have been selling them at cost, more or less.
Less than that actually. I think so. The idea was to get them in people's hands, and then getting people to buy things through them is the idea.
Yeah, get people onto the marketplace.
Yeah, as if. They just got me addicted to a really awful, buggy Russian-made phone game. I don't know.
I've been playing Dino dating simulators, so I have nothing to say.
I was gonna say, buggy Russian dating phone games doesn't really narrow it down now, does it?
No.
Okay, hell, let's see.
You and I should do a video together sometime, Comrade Communicator.
Please do.
For the Diet Soap. I'm sorry, God.
Oh yeah.
Been drinking.
Oh, definitely.
Okay, well, shit. Where do we go from here? Well, unless anybody else in the assembled either physical or virtual space has any other questions, anybody else have any? Jacob, you have any thoughts or?
I was just curious about your. I don't expect you to necessarily know this offhand, but maybe if you could look it up or something. What's the provenance of that Che nuclear quote?
What is the provenance of it? Shit, I don't remember offhand. Yeah, for all I know, I've been quoting the Black Book of Communism all my life. No, I'm pretty sure that I looked it up somewhere, and it looked. I got along a chain of something that looked like it was at least a legitimate newspaper report of the time. But I'm pretty sure that I did my due diligence at some point many years ago. But at this point, it's less than useless because I can't tell you what the provenance is. But
Okay,
I'm pretty sure that I don't think it's that hard to find through like, at least a little rabbit hole of like Wikipedia footnotes and what those lead to,
Yeah, well, I was reluctant to bring up the Spielberg-Reagan thing until I actually saw that Spielberg had just recently confirmed it. So, I understand.
Oh my God, that's pretty great. That's pretty great.
It should be reaffirmed that we do live in the dumbest of all timelines. So.
Yes, we are in the stupidest of all timelines, and I experience that every day.
I'm trying to think of a stupider one.
Have you visited more than one?
Oh, you have to really go into Dadaism there. It's not going to happen.
No, I just imagine one where it's like this timeline, only everyone is literally painted up and dressed like a clown. But that at least seems.
So, I'm sorry, but being painted up and dressed like a clown is my life right now.
That's better.
That is definitely better.
That's at
least honest.
Yeah, honestly, that's like Fellini-esque. That's an aspirational status that we should reach.
Exactly.
Where do we go from here in our recording?
I think we're wrapping it up here. I feel bad for Jacob because Jacob had a plan where he was going to tell us everything we needed to know. We were going to ask questions.
Well, I'm looking at Jacob right now, and he looks really upset. Yeah.
I'm just bored.
Does he? Jacob, do you feel upset?
No, he's not upset. It's just the fact that
this is about what I expected.
Yeah.
I mean, this is how UFO conversations go.
I'm sorry. I've been an agent of chaos.
No, I love agents of chaos.
You actually brought some linear, systematic thinking to a conversation that was all over the place before you even started.
God, I have no idea how the hell I'm gonna edit this.
I'm sorry for that.
Yeah, but I feel that we have just scratched the tip of the iceberg. Does that make any sense? And that not only does you, Comrade Communicator, need to come back someday onto give the microphone to the wrong guy.
Giving the mic. Yeah.
I'm sorry.
Giving the microphone to the wrong woman.
Zero Books podcast as well. And I look forward to talking to you again in the future.
Oh, I would love to. It's been my pleasure. And by the way, I want to apologize for any time I interrupted people. That either there's a lag or I'm terrible at gauging social cues when there's bad sound quality.
Not at all. No, you did fine.
But I just want to issue a general apology for that. I just did it again. I'm sorry.
This is
you're completely fine.
Yeah,
Skype.
Yeah, I was to say we're running a phone call through a Skype call, across the country. So we got some propagation delay. All I'm gonna say
Skype
is
literally blacklisted me for some reason. I don't know what. They
like I said, I'm following the dolphin people on.
There was a classic issue with Art Bell's call-in show where people would never have problems until they were actually calling in to discuss UFOs, and all of a sudden they would just have a wave of phone issues and, would report clicks and noises afterward.
Definitely making sure that they couldn't talk about
this literally happened to me. No. Like, for years, I just, I only use Skype just basically to talk to my boyfriend. That's what I use Skype for.
Okay.
And then suddenly, once I start this Posadist thing, I try to use Skype again. Like, it's my account's been canceled. Then I make a new account. I use it once. Come back, try to use it again. My account's been canceled. It keeps happening. Ever since this is actually ever since I started doing this Posadist thing. Ever since I met Comrade High Commander on the beach.
Wow,
you're suggesting there's a connection then?
So this is yet another paranormal encounter I've had.
Yeah.
And I'm only about 15% kidding too.
The thing about that is, you've had these paranormal encounters, and you rarely leave the house. Imagine what would happen to you if you did.
Well, I mostly leave the house to go to the beach, so I rarely leave the house this time of year.
How much of Coney Island is currently underwater, or at least been reconfigured thanks to was it Hurricane Sandy or?
The better question is how much is going to be underwater.
There's been lasting infrastructural damage to like some trees gone, but didn't do much to the coastline. I think the stone head carvings that were above the sand not long before Sandy have not returned. But that's that's not really that big a thing. It's just a few feet of sand along the shore.
Oh, okay.
So it has had no lasting geographical impact, shall we say? I mean, I think there may have been, some work on that. I know they built up some dunes and shit for the next couple of years. But no, it's still like the amusements are operational in the summer. It's there's some things sadly that are gone and will never come back. I'm pretty sure that the old tattoo parlor bar that hosted like hardcore and metal shows when I was a kid that I never went to because I was a dork and didn't know about it, but went to like one fucking show the year before it closed, is gone now, and there's something really stupid there. So that's the main impact that Sandy has had on Coney Island. That's lasted as far as I'm concerned.
Wow, that's sad.
Sorry for that digression.
No, that's no. Trust me, we have very few irrelevant digressions on this show. All I can say is, yeah, thanks for being because you're 3 time zones ahead of us. So thank you for being open for being contacted damn near last minute from a bunch of us, in a couple different locations in the Pacific Northwest. And I say this sincerely, it's we seriously need a follow-up episode to the point where, because at least two, in the main, in quotes, studio that 3 of us are in, we're active DSA members. We are extremely interested. We think it'd be fucking hilarious to have the DSA Posadist caucus talk to, say, the Portland DSA chapter for shits and giggles, and also the UFO convention in McMinnville, just for the fuck of it. We'll figure something out.
We're currently not in good terms with the Posadist caucus because they did not bring up the disclosure question at the convention, and the DSA being an electoralist social democratic formation, their role, if they have any role in the communist movement, it should be to push for disclosure.
That seems like a ridiculous submission.
No, sorry.
You need to get in there and get the Posadist caucus to fall under the proper discipline of Comrade High Commander and demand disclosure.
Okay. Well, that is a topic for future times.
Yeah.
I will say this: I will say, DSA membership has been quite interesting, especially since last night I got to meet and got a nice photo with Sylvia Federici, which was really cool.
Very nice.
Yeah. It was actually astounding because you just kind of tiny radical Italian communist grandmother just go off. Just go off and just stand on the stage with her handheld mic and address the entire crowd for 2.5 hours. It was wow, this was enthralling.
That does sound awesome.
Yeah.